and welcome to the launch of the International Energy Agency's new special report on strategies for affordable and fair clean energy transitions. I'm Jethro Mullen, head of the IEA's communications team, and I'm joined today by IEA Executive Director Dr. Fatih Birol and by Chief Energy Economist Tim Gould, who oversaw the analysis of this new special report, which is, I would like to note, free to read and download on our website, like virtually all of our reports. So during today's press webinar, Dr. Birol will make some opening remarks, and then Mr. Gould will present the key findings of the report. We'll then take questions from journalists. For the journalists taking part in the press webinar, we invite you to send your questions via the Q&A function in the Zoom. You can do this at any point during the presentation, and we'll also take a 2-minute break right after the presentation for you to enter your questions. And with that, I'll hand over to our Executive Director, Dr. Birol.
Many thanks, Jethro. Greetings to everybody from the International Energy Agency headquarters in Paris. Dear colleagues, dear friends, we are here today to talk about the affordability of energy. This is a major issue of millions of people around the world. It's a core part of the IEA's work, and it has been recently a major topic in economic, energy, and also political discussions. So we thought we should bring some light to this debate, insights to this debate, making a clinical analysis which energy sort is cheap, which is more expensive. And this is the report that we are going to share this with you. Now, but first of all, I should tell you that when we talk about affordability, it has multiple dimensions. There is the affordability of energy within a country, basically rich versus poor income levels, and also internationally, advanced economies versus emerging countries. So there is not one single dimension, and there are different dimensions here. The issue became more important in the last 2 years, mainly after the global energy crisis has started 2 years ago. The energy bill of an average consumer in the world increased by 20%, 1/5, a big increase here, and this is compared to the last 5 years, the average of the energy cost, 2022, it increased by 20%. This is mainly as a result of the impacts of the global energy crisis. And in some countries, governments stepped up and supported the consumers. If this support was not there, this 20% would be even higher compared to past 5 years. And of course, it hit the entire population, but we should also be aware that the biggest part of the hit, the pain, was mainly for the low and mid-income groups in all countries. Now, when we talk about the affordability of energy and what are the causes of the high energy cost, there are misperceptions here. Rightly or wrongly, deliberately, not deliberately. And one of them is the increase in the cost of energy is because of using clean energy. This is wrong. Data doesn't back up this claim. The main reason why we have seen this jump in the cost of energy was Russia, the main gas, the number one gas exporter of the world, cutting its gas supplies to its largest, by far the largest consumer, to Europe, and the corresponding waves in the global energy system, the ramifications on the global energy system. This was the main driver of the high energy costs, and this shouldn't be therefore misinterpreted. The numbers are there, and my colleagues are going to share this with you in a moment. The second misperception, clean energy is always more expensive than the fossil fuels. This is also not right. I mean, we have a lot of evidence, but I can tell you one very simple. In last year, 2023, when you look at the old power plants, new power plants built in the world, more than 85% was renewables. Solar followed by wind, and this was not necessarily, this huge growth was not necessarily driven by climate concerns. It was mainly driven because they were cheaper than the alternatives and the fossil fuel alternatives to those. So we see that the electric cars are growing around the world, and I can tell you that in some parts of the world, electric cars are becoming competitive vis-a-vis the internal combustion engine cars run by oil products. So we are to say, just in general terms, clean energy is more expensive than fossil fuels is not a right statement as well. Having said that, we have to be very frank. There are legitimate questions about how the clean energy costs fare in different countries, different consumers around the world, and it is the reason we made this report. And the biggest challenge, dear colleagues, we are facing today, as far as the clean energy is concerned, is we need high initial upfront costs. And throughout the time, when you build a clean energy facility, it can be a power plant, it can be a heat pump, it can be buying an electric car, the operational costs, in other words, mainly the fuel cost, is very cheap, but the first, having the high upfront cost to finance this is a challenge. It is the reason we made this report, to bring it to the attention to everybody. But when we look at the global picture today, and in my view, this is the main finding of this report, which in my view can be used as a manifesto why clean energy is cheaper. My colleagues' analysis, which was overseen by my colleague Tim Gould, our chief energy economist, says that the energy world, reaching our international energy and climate goals is much more cost effective than compared to a fossil fuel based energy system. So this is I think, first and foremost message coming from this report, based on huge amount of data, ranging from the different income groups, households' budgets, how much they pay for energy, how much they pay for other things, to data on the different energy technologies, country by country, technology by technology, thousands of data. This analysis shows us the very result that going towards a clean energy future is more affordable than a world that we are in, a fossil fuel-based energy system. And it is not only such a world, it's not only affordable, but it also provides other benefits, such as avoiding the catastrophic implications of climate change, or avoiding the energy security risk that we have been facing in a fossil fuel-based world, or providing a better air and for the citizens. In other words, a better planet, a better life for everybody. Now, dear colleagues, having said that, I should mention to you that there are several challenges in front of us. One of them is, today, the use of fossil fuels around the world is subsidized heavily. use of oil, gas, and coal subsidized about $620 billion 2023. $620 billion was mobilized to support the use of fossil fuels around the world, which compares the support for clean energy around the world about $70 billion. So fossil fuel use has been supported almost 10 times more than the incentivizing the use of clean energy, and I think this is an important challenge. What happens if we are able to jump over, address the high initial cost of clean energy technologies and build a future which is based on clean energy and less fossil fuels? Many things change, and I can tell you one of them. Today, when we talk about the cost of energy, in general terms, the reference number comes to our mind when we discuss it is energy prices are high or low. It is the oil prices. Oil cost $80 per barrel. It went $60 per barrel, increase $90 per barrel. This is the main reference, the benchmark measuring the cost of energy, and in a clean energy world, this will change. The benchmark will move from the dollar per barrel to the cent per kilowatt hour of electricity. Electricity prices set to replace the oil prices in a world where clean energy dominates our global energy system. So, dear colleagues, I wanted to also once again highlight the challenge in front of us, and this is not to be underestimated. When you build a clean energy system in a country, in a household, in a political environment, you have to make some investment. Buying an electric car, or installing a heat pump. In the beginning, one has to pay significant amount of the initial cost. But afterwards, life continues. Afterwards, the amount of operating costs, which is mainly the fuel costs, will be much lower. And when we look at throughout the time, as our report underlines bold, in a clean energy system, the cost of energy is much more affordable. Plus, compared to fossil fuel dominated energy system, you are not at the mercy of the Russian gas is cut, or you are not going to suffer with the oil price hikes as we have experienced in the previous years. So therefore, there are many benefits of having a clean energy future, and to reach those targets, to reach a clean energy future. Building a clean energy future is affordable, but here, as I said, the governments need to move. There is a need for governments to support, to come up with smart, well-proven policies. This can range from helping the retrofitting the low-income households, to support the consumers to purchase heat pumps, or oblige the utilities to support the heating and cooling systems, or, of course, cutting the fossil fuel subsidies and supporting the clean energy. There, in our report, you will see we have lots of suggestions, policy coming from different countries, and this has been proven. It has been proven in France, in Ghana, in Ireland, in Canada, in many parts of the world. And if those proven, well-designed policies are applied, then we can jump over the biggest hurdle of the initial investments needed to build our clean energy future. And as International Energy Agency, we wanted to also support these efforts globally and bring a global momentum here. In addition to coming with this, in my view, the manifesto of affordable energy today, we are also, in terms of the governance of this issue, we have recently built, and thanks to my friend, my colleague, Brian Motherway, head of our Energy Efficiency Division, a global commission on people-centered clean energy transition. This global commission, ladies and gentlemen, brings several ministers of energy, economy, climate from advanced economies and from the emerging countries. It brings the leaders of the major trade unions around the world, from Africa, Latin America, Europe, North America, Asia, and elsewhere. It brings together the executives of the energy companies, oil, gas, renewables, technology companies, and the mandate of this global commission is to come up with the concrete policy suggestions for countries around the world in order to bring a clean energy future. And the first meeting of this global commission will be in conjunction of G20 meeting in Brazil, and hope that it will also support, it will also add to the efforts to build a clean and more affordable and peaceful energy future. With this, dear colleagues, I wanted to thank my colleague, Mr. Tim Gould, our chief energy economist, and his excellent team for showing this report that building a clean and affordable energy is doable. It is in our hands. And I would like to now turn to Mr. Gould to share some of the findings of this study to make you understand that we can all build a clean and affordable energy future. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much indeed, Executive Director, and welcome everyone to this launch presentation. And thanks to all the colleagues from around the agency that have contributed to this work, but thanks too to the support that we've received from many international partners, including the Brazilian G20 presidency. There's some very close links between some of the themes that we're looking at in this work and the priority in Brazil's G20 presidency for social inclusion. And with this work, a natural starting point is indeed the work for the global energy crisis, because as was mentioned by Dr. Birol, this was a huge shock to the system and provided a reminder, if we needed one, of the importance of affordability. You can see here the spikes in fossil fuel prices that were experienced, led by natural gas in Europe, but really felt around the world. And as was mentioned, this had a strong impact on consumers, on household energy bills, that 20% increase that the Executive Director mentioned. You pushed up inflation with knock-on effects then on interest rates, creating a more difficult macroeconomic environment for investors, including investors in clean energy. And it had implications too in some of the poorest countries of the world. As many will be aware, there are something like 750 million people around the world who have no access to electricity, and a much larger number that don't have access to clean cooking fuels. And the electricity numbers are shown on the screen. We had a steadily improving trend for access to electricity, but this was reversed first by the effects of the pandemic and then by the strains caused by the global energy crisis, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. And that highlights how the consequences of price increases are not felt evenly across different income groups. Low income groups get hit hardest. And for the first time in this report, we went through a mountain of different survey data and to put together a picture of the world's household energy use and expenditure by income group. And you can see some summary results on the screen. And it really highlights some of the inequalities in today's energy system. In advanced economies, the poorest 10% of households spent close to 1/4 of their disposable income on residential energy and transport fuels, even though they consume around half as much of these fuels as the richest 10%. The picture is different, but no more encouraging in a way in emerging and developing economies. There's even larger disparities across income groups, with the poorest grouping consuming 1/4 that of the richest. But you can also see that the poorest do not spend much of their income on energy. But this is not a positive indicator at all. It's because the energy needs among the poorest houses are often simply not being met. And where they are met, it is often with firewood and other biomass that is collected but not paid for, and so it doesn't feature in the expenditure metrics. So the starting point for our analysis is one of energy vulnerability for many in the global population. Changes in circumstances or rises in energy prices can leave people without the ability to meet their basic energy needs. Then we move on to look at what's happening with the clean energy technologies that the executive director mentioned. And the declining cost of those technologies is a really key element of our analysis. The situation varies from country to country and technology to technology, but increasingly we are seeing that affordable choices are also the clean ones, especially when lifetime costs are taken into account. And this trend is set to continue as clean technology costs continue to come down. So these are some examples. These are all unsubsidized costs. For the moment, EVs, electric cars, remain between 10 and 50% more expensive on an upfront basis than combustion engine equivalents in Europe and in the United States, depending on the country and the car segment. But this is offset over the lifetime of the car by lower operating costs. It's not always the case that upfront costs are more expensive. One of the fascinating findings of our recent global EV outlook was that some 60% of electric cars sold in 2023 in China were already cheaper than their average combustion engine equivalent. And you can work through different examples. In India, an electric two-wheeler is more expensive to purchase, but considerably cheaper to run. A high-efficiency air conditioner in Brazil is slightly more expensive to buy, but quickly generates savings with its operation. And even in a market with quite low natural gas prices, like the US, a heat pump that can provide heating and cooling is a more affordable option than having separate gas boiler for heating and air conditioning units. And these are comparisons that are just based on questions of affordability. The case for clean technology is, of course, much stronger if you price in the benefits for emissions and air quality and so on. So what does this mean for the overall affordability of energy as the world moves through energy transitions? To answer this question, we needed to sort of, in a sense, get under the hood of the energy system, look at its core function, the business of delivering energy to consumers. So the numbers here are global, but don't include the taxes or subsidies levied by governments or provided by governments to consumers. This is the system, in a sense, stripped back to its energy essentials. And at the moment, the energy delivery costs in 2023, in our view, was around $7 trillion. And that's essentially covering two things. First, that what we call the capital and financing costs, that's the money to pay back existing investments into energy supply infrastructure and efficiency improvements, some of which may have been made years or even decades ago, as well as the financing cost, of course. And second, on top, the operating costs of the system, and that's mainly the costs of those recurring expenditure on fuels and fossil fuels, as well as some maintenance. So let's look at how this plays out 10 years from now comparing a scenario based on today's policy settings, so today's direction of travel, with an accelerated energy transitions consistent with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And you can see that in both scenarios, but particularly in that 1.5 degree pathway, there's a large increase in the capital recovery part to pay for the transformation in the system, but the very rapid transformation that you have in a 1.5 degree world. But that's more than offset by sharp reductions in operating costs, basically because of much lower requirements for ongoing expenditure on fossil fuels. So the message here is that clean energy transitions are not a luxury item. They're a significant upgrade in terms of efficiency and performance on the system that we have today. And again, that's a conclusion that we reach even before considering the environmental gains. There is strong momentum behind transitions, but of course there's also obstacles, and one of them was referred to by our executive director, and that's that imbalance in the way that governments support fossil fuel consumption versus consumers switching to clean energy. So that's the $620 billion that were, in our view, spent subsidizing the consumption of fossil fuels. It's mainly in emerging and developing economies. Those fossil fuel consumption subsidies are typically justified as a means to a social end, so the need to keep energy affordable for vulnerable groups, even though in practice many of those subsidies are poorly targeted and end up benefiting disproportionately higher income groups that use more of the fuel that's being subsidized. So progress with clean energy transitions requires phasing out those subsidies, the ones that don't address energy poverty, as soon as possible. And the best way forward is to replace them with targeted cash transfers for vulnerable groups. But that does mean that in some emerging developing economies, this would push up energy expenses for some better off households, at least during an initial period of adjustment. And what does that mean then for the total global energy bill for consumers, putting those underlying costs together with taxes and subsidy removal? So this is the picture up to today. This is where the money goes. By far the largest proportion of global consumer spending on energy goes to oil, followed by electricity, with much smaller shares for natural gas, coal, and low emission fuels like bioenergy. You can see immediately on the screen that the electricity component is much more stable and predictable than that of the fossil fuel side. If we look at how that plays out in a world that's following today's policy settings, following today's direction of travel, strong growth in electricity and to a degree also for low emissions fuels, but continued large spending on oil, that would in all probability continue to be quite volatile in practice. If we move to a much more rapid energy transition aligned with the 1.5 degree goal, the situation changes quite dramatically. You have some higher expenditure initially as fossil fuel subsidies are removed, but then electricity quickly becomes the sort of dominant vector, the central element in the global energy bill as expenditure on oil comes down. Realizing this scenario requires a surge in investment. This is something we've talked about before. It's something that we'll return to again, notably next week when we release our new World Energy Investment publication. And our new analysis emphasizes once again the importance of mobilizing capital for clean energy projects. So the 1.5 degree trajectory that you're looking at on the screen requires a significant increase in capital spending over and above the trajectory that we're on. It's true for clean power generation, for storage, for grids, for low emissions fuels. It's true also when we look at the end use sectors, so the efficiency side, the electrification, some of those consumer facing investments that we've been talking about. And that increase is particularly steep in emerging and developing economies outside China, which today account for some 2/3 of the world's population, but only 15% of clean energy investment. Some of that is, in a sense, compensated by a significantly lower investment in fossil fuels, again, depending on the trajectory. But you need to find additional sources of capital in order to get on track for that 1.5 degree world. And there's another angle here too. Who needs to be making these investments? Governments, could be state-owned enterprises, private companies, and in some cases households. And we've looked at how that responsibility, how that divides up across the different groups. And particularly in that central column, you see that a lot of those end-use efficiency and electrification investments go on to households. But as we've seen at the start of this presentation, and as the Executive Director mentioned, many lower income households simply paying for energy is already a struggle. So how can we avoid the risk that these households are simply excluded from the clean energy economy because they can't manage those upfront costs? And that's where we come to the design of clean energy policies, which are absolutely critical to fair and affordable outcomes. So in the report, you'll find multiple examples from different countries of the ways that the design of clean energy policies affects the distribution of costs and benefits. And they show that governments do have options to make clean energy more widely accessible, and that these do not have to be expensive. There's many examples to choose from, but I'll highlight a couple of examples here before closing. The first one is the way that home energy efficiency retrofits are promoted in France. So families on lower incomes often live in older, poorly insulated homes and spend more of their income on energy, and they can't afford to participate in programs to upgrade the efficiency of their homes. There's a program in France, MaPrimeRénov', which was introduced in 2020. It provides funding for home upgrades in the absence of targeting. This is the sort of outcome that you would have expected. So with the bulk of the benefits accruing to higher income groups. But that's not what happened in practice, because eligibility criteria were structured in a way that favoured lower income groups. And you can see that the way that the distribution was in the end reflected a much fairer and more equal allocation of the benefits. A second example comes from India, and its support for sustainable transport. In India, as in many other countries, the upfront investment cost of an electric car is out of reach for many consumers, and lower income consumers in particular, even if it's at a comparable price to a conventional car. So the government needed to find other ways to promote affordable and accessible electric transport. And there's a program called FAME, which is now in its second phase. FAME means faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles. And what the government did in that instance was to focus support on electric two-wheelers, on electric three-wheelers, on electric buses that are much more likely to be used by lower income segments of the population. So for an electric two-wheeler, the FAME scheme has been covering almost half of the upfront cost, for a three-wheeler, around 1/3. And the results have been impressive. Overall, electric vehicle sales have risen by more than 10 times in 5 years, and this has come primarily from two and three-wheelers. The subsidy decreased in 2023, but this hasn't dented sales. So this scheme has ensured a much wider population has benefited from the support of electric mobility. Finally, some concluding thoughts. Affordability and fairness are rightly at the centre of the energy debate. Many consumers are still feeling the bruises from the price spikes for natural gas and other fossil fuels, and the pressures that this created on the cost of living. Our analysis is clear that clean energy technologies can offer a lasting solution, not only to the urgent challenge of climate change, but also to the pressures that we've seen on consumers. They deliver a cheaper energy system. But as we've highlighted, there's an upfront cost to pay to get this, and in the absence of intentional policy actions, intentional policy design, poorer countries, lower income groups in all countries may struggle to gain a foothold in the clean energy economy. And there's an international dimension to this in the way that countries collaborate on climate change and provide technical, financial support for emerging developing economies. And there's also a national policy dimension where good data, targeted actions, effective regulation, good communication are needed to deliver a fair distribution of benefits. So one outcome of this process in rapid clean energy transitions is that the number that will matter most to us as consumers will change. So cents per kilowatt hour, as the executive director mentioned, electricity becomes the one that we will start to need to watch most closely, much more so than that dollars per barrel of oil. But the bottom line, affordability is an outcome of clean energy transitions, not a barrier to them. There are challenges, of course, and we've discussed some of them. There will surely be bumps along the road, but our analysis clearly shows that clean energy technologies are the gateway to a cheaper energy system, as well as a fairer, safer, and more sustainable one. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So we now have time to take some questions from journalists and invite the journalists in attendance to send your questions through the Q&A function of the Zoom if you haven't done so already. And please mention your media outlet along with your question. We'll just take a 2-minute break to give you a chance to enter your questions. We'll be right back. Hi everyone, welcome back, and thank you to the journalists for the questions so far. We're going to see how many of them we can get through. The first one comes from Frédéric Simon from Carbon Pulse. His question is, in the EU, countries like Germany and France have more budgetary capacity to support consumers in the green transition, while others, like Poland, don't necessarily have the same means. Do you see a risk of an east-west divide in the EU when it comes to affordability of clean energy solutions for consumers, and what's to be done about it? And then a similar question is, can you give some examples of how governments can help overcome the high upfront investment costs that consumers face for adopting clean energy? Perhaps we'll, those two similar questions I'll give to Tim, who led the work on the report. So thanks very much for the question. So this, I think, gets to the heart of some of the things that we were looking at in the analysis, because it asked the question about the potential for divisions, both internationally on energy climate issues, but also within countries, between people who find that step more accessible and people who struggle. And the whole essence of the report is to try and find ways to bridge those gaps. So I think you could, I mean, the question is referring to kind of intra-EU politics, but I think you could easily broaden that out to the discussions around climate finance, around the support that is required for a whole range of emerging
and developing economies. So I think there's that international dimension that Executive Director mentioned at the start, which is of course going to come back again during the discussions at COP. I won't focus too much on it now, only to say that we have argued strongly in other analysis that we've done about the need for sort of international solidarity amongst the need for the richer countries to not just take the lead on clean energy deployment, but also help others along the way. But when we talk about the mechanisms that can work within countries, I mean, I've highlighted some examples during the presentation, particularly the way that support for retrofits can be made more readily available or accessible to lower income households. New building standards are extremely important, particularly in fast growing economies. And there is a range of mechanisms that governments can deploy in a sense to shift that upfront cost away from households and on to other groups. For example, you can put an obligation on utilities to fund more efficient heating or cooling systems. And there are over 30 countries around the world have this sort of energy efficiency obligation in place, although it's not always targeted as much as it could be. I think there's also very interesting ways in which you can use lease arrangements or pay-as-you-go arrangements for some of them. So that avoids then the upfront costs going on to those households. Pay-as-you-go arrangements are also extremely important when you consider about expanding access to things like solar home heating systems, so solar home systems in developing economies. We would underline also the importance of things like minimum energy performance standards to help provide a baseline of efficiency for appliances that are then on the market. And there are examples, and we highlight some from Mexico to show that that does not come at the cost of affordability. It just provides a benchmark for the market, which is very important to be met. And Senegal, Ghana also show how with small top-up financing, you can make some of those more efficient models or best-in-class models for appliances available to more broadly. There's a range of issues around affordability on the transport side as well. Within Europe, obviously, there's some broad infrastructure support programs that can enable then the build-out of public transportation, and also institutions like the European Investment Bank, with whom we have a very strong dialogue, and that is available to help provide some of the financing that is available. And one final point on Europe, because I think it's interesting to see how the extension of carbon pricing schemes beyond the power sector or beyond the emissions intensive sectors, they could clearly have distributional impacts, because you risk having the poorer parts of society bearing a disproportionate share of those CO2 costs because they can't make the switch as quickly to cleaner energy. So recycling those revenues, for instance, through the European Union Social Climate Fund, I think is an important opportunity as well.
Thank you, Tim. And just continuing on the affordability question, it was mentioned that the volatility that we've seen in gas markets and oil markets in recent years, but in a sense isn't a shift to clean energy technologies swapping that oil and gas market volatility for volatility in critical minerals markets, which go into the clean energy technologies. So one problem for another, in a sense.
So I think it's an important point, and it often comes up, but I think we're dealing with different categories of risk here, because if oil prices go up, that affects everyone who uses oil. Everyone who's filling up their car at the pump will feel that increase in the oil price. Whereas critical minerals are essential for the transformation of the energy sector, but they only go into new technologies that are coming to the market. So it doesn't have the same implications then for the direct implications for consumer energy bills. Nonetheless, it is very important. And you have seen volatility also in the prices, particularly of the battery metals over the last 12 to 18 months. They've come down now, but some analysis that we released recently suggests that as we move through transitions, demand will pick up, and in some cases, particularly for copper and for lithium, demand could pick up more quickly than new projects come through. So there's certainly the potential for pressure on prices there, and that's something we need to be very watchful of. And one of the conclusions of our new critical minerals analysis was that there's a range of actions that need to be taken, not just on the supply side, but also on the demand side with recycling, technology innovation, right sizing of batteries, that would enable us to ensure those elements are balanced as we go ahead.
Thanks a lot. And just, I think we're a little bit over time, but we can fit in a couple more. On that question of oil prices shifting away from oil markets towards more to electricity markets, and the comment that Dr. Birrell made about the main energy benchmark shifting from oil prices to electricity prices. Can you explain a bit more what that means? And then a topic that's been often the subject of debate in some countries and some regions. When you talk about affordability and clean energy, does clean energy, are you including nuclear energy in clean energy? So those two questions for Dr. Birrell.
Thanks, Jethro. Two different questions. So in terms of the moving from as the benchmark, the dollar per barrel of oil as the benchmark of cost of energy today to cent per kilowatt hour is a reflection of the consumer's spending on energy. Today, on average, the average consumer, the energy spending, if you look at it, 50% of the spending of a consumer is oil and oil products, and about the one-third, close to one-third, is electricity costs. But if we go to a clean energy world, a clean, affordable, and more secure energy world, then we see that the share of electricity is growing, and therefore, in the share of the cost of electricity in the total energy spending of a consumer increases to about 50%, and the share of oil spending goes down to 25%. So the main benchmark becomes the cent per kilowatt hour rather than dollar per barrel. Of course, this doesn't mean that the oil will disappear from one day to another. We will still need to use oil and natural gas, but the dominant, the benchmark will be here, the electricity prices, as we believe in a clean energy world, the electricity is the future. Talking about electricity is the future, the second question on nuclear power. Dear colleagues, dear friends, when we look at the future of electricity generation, we see that the growth will be dominated by renewables, solar, wind, hydropower, geothermal, bioenergy, and others. But we also see that the nuclear power can, and in my view, should play a role. The lion's share is renewables, but nuclear can make a contribution, especially in the countries where you do not have plenty of renewable energy sources, where you have already a nuclear industry, and therefore we believe nuclear is also a part of the clean electricity generation in the countries, of course, where it is accepted. But in general, I can say that the IEA has rightly predicted 2 years ago, and it is happening now, nuclear is making a comeback, a strong comeback around the world, especially in the countries where we don't have huge amount of renewable sources or to support them. So for the IEA, nuclear is part of the clean electricity generation. And Jethro, if I may, before turning to you, I wanted to say that, dear colleagues, we have seen today in this report, I think one of the most important reports we have published this year, we underline the very fact that the future of energy, if it is clean, it is at the same time more secure, it is at the same time more affordable, and it is at the same time provides a better life for everybody around this world. Now, over to you, Jethro.
Thank you, Dr. Birrell. That seems like a good note to end on, and that is indeed all we have time for. If any journalists have questions that didn't get answered during the Q&A that you'd like to follow up on, we invite you to reach out to our press office and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So final thanks to Dr. Birrell and to Mr. Gould, to the journalists for the questions, and to everyone following the event online for the interest in our work. The full special report is available for free on our website, so do please take a look. Thank you and goodbye.